The Garden of Sinners Future Gospel is a story told in essentially 3 parts because it tells 3 different stories. The initial 2 stories are about, well, the entire actual thing is about people who can see the future. Apparently, people who can see the future have this ability to sort of like remember the environments around them, and they use that to either predict or calculate the future. People who can calculate the future can do it with more accuracy, but if their calculations end up going tits up, they're shit out of luck, whereas people who predict it are more adaptable and fluid, but they get less of a clear idea of the future. That's how they explain it in the movie, or at least close enough that it doesn't fucking matter. Regardless, so we see 3 different characters across 3 different timelines that can all see the future. One of which is the roommate of Kokuto's sister, who we get a brief sight of back in Oblivion recording, the one with the dog that they're keeping in the dorm room. And it turns out she can see the future, and she ends up encountering Kokuto, who shows her that the future is not predetermined. And the future not being predetermined is actually sort of the central theme of Future Gospel, and is basically what the whole thing is about. We also have a side story of a young boy who can also see the future, but he has a calculation type, unlike the roommate with the prediction type of future sight. It doesn't functionally matter except for how this sort of ends. And he is basically using this to do his job as a sort of bomber when Shiki ends up seeing him blow up a building, and then he starts targeting Shiki. This does not work how he wants because he's targeting Shiki. And also, we see that Kokuto has an eye in this flashback, and Shiki isn't like as put together as she is in the later parts. So if I had to play, oh, and also we know that this occurs before Oblivion recording. So if I had to guess, this occurs somewhere in the movie 4 or 5 range. If I maybe even in the 3 range, somewhere in that general zone. They give dates, but I pay enough attention to the dates in Garden of Sinners because really, honestly, who gives a shit? Anyway, yeah, so he ends up encountering Shiki, who does something fucking crazy in this moment, where she, like, blows out his eyeball by hitting one of the weak points using her Mystic Eyes of Death perception. And throughout the entirety of Garden of Sinners, this is the craziest feat she ever pulls off. And I'm mostly bringing this up because we sort of know that the Mystic Eyes of Death perception can do this. I think the first time I watched this, I interpreted it as her killing the future, but what I actually think she did is killed his prediction. But regardless, we know that it makes sense for the Mystic Eyes of Death perception to do this, but these crazier, like, kill tricks are something that sort of comes more into play in, like, Tsukihime, which I believe came out after Garden of Sinners. But it is worth noting that Future Gospel, I believe, was written well after the original Garden of Sinners run anyway. Like, it was a good number of years, possibly even like a decade or so afterward. So it is worth noting that the effect and power of the Mystic Eyes of Death perception have sort of changed. And so we get sort of like the later crazy abilities, which is actually kind of funny because, again, this is sort of set probably in the 3, 4, 5 range as far as Garden of Sinners goes, which means briefly, in this one moment, Shiki has the full power that they later expand into the Mystic Eyes of Death perception, and she fucking never again uses it in any of the other movies, no matter how convenient and useful it would be. Doesn't matter. The later one is about this guy. Who's this mysterious guy? It's really easy to figure out who the mysterious guy is. They beat you over the head with it the whole time. Anyway, the mysterious guy ends up working with the daughter of this woman. Who's the woman? Oh, it's so hard to find out. Look, honestly, let's be real. You can watch this for like 6 seconds. They don't even try and hide it. The guy's clearly the bomber from before. The little girl is clearly the daughter of Shiki and probably Kokuto. And they end up encountering this old lady who is I want to think, what was her name? Mother of Mifune, I think, who helped out the alternate male persona of Shiki in the past by sort of like lightening the persona's mood and, sort of helping them out. So we basically get like 3 time travels. I will say that their daughter Mana is fucking cute as a button. Absolutely adorable. This movie is actually pretty good, and I did enjoy it. It manages to like properly integrate its 3 plot lines into each other in a like satisfying way, and it's unlike earlier Garden of Sinners movies. This movie is not up its own ass. I actually did not record my original vlogs for Garden of Sinners, and I actually think I am going to read a direct quote from the original 100 Anime in 1 Month challenge that I wrote about this movie, because I think it actually does hold up, and I think it is probably worth talking about. So, The Garden of Sinners Future Gospel is actually the cleverest of these movies, despite the earlier movies trying to seem clever. It's also the most entertaining. You see, this movie starts with a flash forward where Shiki dies, then introduces 2 characters that can see the future. It uses them as a way to introduce both the discussion of the future and the ability to see the future. It resolves one of their plots with proof that the future can be changed, then proceeds to alter the flash forward from earlier, thus changing the future. Then it time skips even later to a time not shown earlier because nobody could see it, where characters that used to be able to see the future but can't become the main focus, symbolizing that they're no longer living in the future but now the present. So I think that's a little interesting take from 2018 SAC, who I think makes a pretty strong point. Regardless, Future Gospel is honestly probably the best way to have ended Garden of Sinners, not just because it gives us a sort of a true epilogue that lets us see the characters in their later years, but also because it was the best movie of the bunch. Okay, so time for an afterword. Don't usually do this either, but I did a foreword for the entire series rewatch, so might as well do this. Here's the thing. The entire purpose of rewatching The Garden of Sinners was to see if I did, in fact, miss something, if there was some hidden depths to the movies missed to the first times, and if I enjoyed them more the second time, because everyone kept telling me I was super wrong about them the first time. I think there's different layers to what has been learned by rewatching them. I will say that at the very least, if we want to get this out of the way, did I enjoy the movies more the second time? No, absolutely not. If we go over the scores, the original mean was 5.4, and the original median was 5.5, and the new mean is 5.4, and the new median is 5. So even if you're just like looking at the scores that I gave them, although some of them got upgrades, it looks like by and large most of the scores went down as a series. And I would say that that pretty much well mirrors my thoughts on the whole series. Is going into this, I was like, okay, maybe I missed something. Maybe it's secretly good. But no, I would say by and large, my opinion of the entire franchise has gone drastically down to the point where, honestly, my opinion of Type Moon is sort of damaged as a whole by watching this. Like, it makes me retroactively think, you know what, maybe Type Moon kind of sucks all around, because I really only like very limited series from Type Moon anyway. Regardless, I do think there is some additional critique that I can provide to the entire series, and not just each individual movie, that I've been holding on to, that upon the accusation that I did miss hidden depths to the movies in the first watch, I will say that is probably accurate. I probably wasn't picking up on the sort of like themes of bonds and connections between people, helping to stave off more darker impulses, such as suicide, drug use, and, violent tendencies. So there were probably hidden themes I weren't picking up on the first time, but, as I said in one of the previous movies, having themes doesn't mean shit. It's about how you execute. And even if there was some hidden depths, I don't think the hidden depths were good or very well handled. So honestly, if anything, looking into and evaluating what the movies were actually trying to say is what damaged my opinion more. Like, actively engaging with the content made the content worse. I will say there is also additional bits of critique I would like to levy against this. Mostly, I want to briefly talk about sort of feminist writing critique here, with 2 specific points I want to bring up, which is sort of like the sexy lamp critique and the Bechdel test. So as a bit of a explanation, the sexy lamp test is sort of a feminist writing critique to demonstrate how poorly written women are in some media. The idea is that the woman has no real purpose in the plot beyond being a sort of object of desire or, a sexy centerpiece for the characters to sort of leer at. She has no real sort of agency or control over the events in the series. And the Bechdel test, of course, is based off of a famous feminist comic, which might actually still be running, where the idea in the original comic was like 2 women talking about movies, and the test in itself is the idea that there needs to be 2 female characters named having a conversation with each other about something other than a man. And I will say that I used to think that the Bechdel test was actually like an insurmountable bar, often because I and many other people misinterpret how the actual criteria of the test, which is I used to erroneously believe that the idea that no series with a male lead could possibly pass the Bechdel test. But then I realized that a misinterpretation that's very common among people is nowhere in the Bechdel test does it specifically state that a man cannot be present in the conversation with the women, just that the man cannot be the subject of the conversation. So a man can be talking to two named women about a subject that's not a man, and they will still pass the Bechdel test. So the bar is literally on the floor. And the reason I'm bringing up these forms of like feminist writing critique is not because I do not believe that Garden of Sinners would pass the Bechdel test, and I am not claiming that Shiki or probably any woman in Garden of Sinners is a sexy lamp. These claims would be wildly inaccurate, and I'm not stating them. I am actually going to say that Garden of Sinners fails a reverse Bechdel test, and Kokoto is a sexy lamp. Now, let's dissect that for a real moment here. There are not many named male characters in the entirety of Garden of Sinners, and of the ones that exist, they're mostly Kokoto and the two villains. The two villains have a discussion about Shiki. Kokoto talks to the guy who's disguised as Shiki about Shiki, and there's no one else, so that's it. So if we reverse the genders on the Bechdel test and say that, two guys have to have names sharing a scene with each other and then talking about something other than a woman, the fucking no point do I think this series ever succeeds at doing this. Then we have to look over, well, is Kokoto a sexy lamp? And the answer is like, absolutely. Kokoto doesn't do jack shit in this series. He acts as a grounding force for Shiki, but he mostly runs around as a sort of damsel in distress character, getting himself into trouble, getting captured, and sort of acting as a sort of like a guidepost. There, I believe, is a sort of like alternative to the sexy lamp, which is like sexy lamp with a post-it, because occasionally Kokoto will deliver like lines of dialogue, but outside of the fact that he occasionally says things, Kokoto himself has no agency or personality or relevance to the plot that is not directly linked to Shiki. He is honestly one of the most nothing characters I have experienced in any anime, possibly any piece of media. He is an absolute fucking blank slate of a character that does nothing and serves very little purpose other than to stand there and look cute. The reason I'm specifically bringing up these sort of reversals of feminist writing critique is divorced from the sort of feminist connotations of these tests. I think the sexy lamp test and the Bechdel test are important pieces of media critique, not necessarily because it shows how, again, often this would be women that are portrayed this way, but any character is being treated in a very sort of like disposable, poorly written, poorly fleshed out manner. It goes to show that the characters themselves have very little relevance to the plot. It is useful in calling out very poor character writing, which Garden of Sinners is absolutely filled with. It is also a series with some of the worst dialogue I have ever fucking seen. These characters do not speak like fucking humans, and occasionally Toko is 90% of the time just there to deliver exposition on the stupid fucking magic system that I'm not going to say doesn't make sense, but I'm going to say who the fuck cares? Oh yeah, and that's not even to mention what I've described in the other previous ones about how poorly it handles its mature subject matter. It tries so hard to be a deep, mature series, and it fails at every level. So this is a fucking series that fails at writing characters. It fails at the themes it's trying to adjust. It fails at writing, like, proper fucking storylines. It doesn't even tell itself in proper order. Like, the Garden of Sinners sort of fails at every level, and I usually try to address series with more tact than I'm about to, but after basically being convinced to rewatch by a bunch of commenters, I'm gonna say this with my fucking chest. The Garden of Sinners is a bad series. It is bad, and anything it does can be done better, has been done better in other media. Now, with that said, I will also say that I think rewatching Garden of Sinners for the purpose of this is sort of a one-off thing. You're not going to get a bunch of commenters sort of convincing me to rewatch anything of the else I've sort of given a negative review to. I mostly wanted to focus on Garden of Sinners because of how common, and honestly because of one very specific comment that convinced me to look back into it. And if anything, I feel like my opinion that whatever I said the first time was probably the most accurate, and I'm just going to repeat myself, is sort of reinforced through this rewatch. Garden of Sinners has convinced me that if I gave something a negative review the first time, it's probably not going to get any better. So don't expect me to ever do this again, and frankly, I regret watching this. Twitch and Discord in the description. I've been Sacrobolic, your envoy of hope. Bye-bye.